Welcome to the National Alopecia Areata Foundation's webinar, Mental Health and Living with Alopecia Areata. Our speaker today is Lisa Lombard, PhD, licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm Lisa Anderson, Senior Director of Research for NAF. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We've disabled chat for this webinar session. Please post questions for Dr. Lombard in the Q&A section. The webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording via email a few days after the program. And finally, please share your feedback with us. At the conclusion of the webinar, a link to a short survey will pop up in your browser window. Please complete the survey there. We appreciate your feedback. This webinar is part of NAF's You Are Not Alone Education and Empowerment webinar series. We're hosting a diverse group of speakers on a range of topics. We want this series to meet your needs, and we welcome your input on the topics you would like to see covered. NAF gratefully acknowledges the support provided for this series by Eli Lilly and Company. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to tell you a bit about NAF and our mission. The National Alopecia Areata Foundation is the leading advocacy organization for alopecia areata and celebrated its 40th anniversary last year. NAF's mission is to support research to find a cure or acceptable treatment for alopecia areata, support those with the disease, and educate the public about alopecia areata. NAF's vision is an empowered community with a choice to embrace or live free of alopecia areata. To learn more about NAF's support resources and research and advocacy activities, or to join us as an advocate or supporter, please visit our website at naf.org. We are talking about mental health today. If you or a loved one are in a mental health emergency or suicidal crisis, help is available. Call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The Lifeline provides 24/7 free and confidential support for people in distress, as well as prevention and crisis resources for you or your loved ones. And now on to today's webinar, Mental Health and Living with Alopecia Areata. We're very pleased to have with us Dr. Lisa Lombard. Dr. Lombard is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice with over 30 years of experience. In her practice with children, families, and adults, she integrates relational and mind-body skills to support coping with anxiety, stress-mediated health concerns, and associated pain. As a former research assistant professor at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, she applied her knowledge of stress management skills to meet the psychosocial and emotional needs of individuals with food allergies, eczema, and atopic disease. Dr. Lombard, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it, and I will stop sharing my screen now and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And if you can just let me know if you see the screen properly.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Well, it's quite a delight to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation. I say tonight because I'm in Chicago and it's turning a little bit dark. There is a storm. There was some thunder just now. So in case anyone hears that in the background, that's what's happening. I appreciate that warm introduction as we talk tonight about mental health and alopecia areata. I decided that this opening slide would really be my effort to present kind of a simple description. And of course, there's nothing simple about this, but I wrote the immune system mistakenly attacks hair follicles, causing inflammation and potentially hair loss. So there it is. It seems simple, although many of you are living with something that is not particularly simple. And so we're going to be talking about that tonight. I'm just trying to advance. There we go. Found my button to advance. So then I decided to drill down a little bit more to better understand and talk about what is actually going on. What is the process? Oops. It's an autoimmune disease, and your immune system mistakes the normal cells in your body as if they were foreign invaders and attacks these cells. And we're getting a sense, perhaps even of feeling a little bit stressed by that description of what is going on. And then there's really a much more medical explanation and these photographs and the different parts of the hair follicles and talking about the immunoinflammatory cells that cause hair growth, cycle disruption, and follicle damage, which leads to a collapse of the hair follicle immune privilege. All of that is going on, but is that really what you're about to say to people when you're in conversation with them? Probably not. It's quite complex and it's not as simple as I gave the impression initially. I also want to point out some reminders, very sensitive, that men and women are equally impacted by this. It can start at any age, but most people, as I understand it from reading, are noticing in their teens, 20s, or 30s. And yet children younger than age 10 are also diagnosed. And when that occurs, it may be more extensive and progressive. Alopecia areata affects all racial and ethnic groups. And in conclusion, we can think that it varies widely and it's different for everyone who has it. So here we are to talk about emotions and mental health related to this. And I'm really curious about what are the common feelings that you've all been experiencing or noticing. Certainly some that come to mind are grief, sadness, anxiety, loss, fear, embarrassment, loneliness, and anger. I imagine that you can think of times when you felt these emotions as well as additional feelings. And in a moment, we're actually going to pull everyone to talk about that. So in addition to those feelings, there are thoughts that come along, right? It's not all about the feeling. And so those thoughts might range from self-blame, did I do something wrong, to the sense of loss and grief that an era in life is changed or over, or that difficulties are emerging. Could be embarrassment and shame and concern that someone will find out about the disease, or that they'll notice that you're wearing a wig or a hat. It may be that you feel a sense of urgency and preoccupation as you search for answers related to this and how to live with the disease and improve your quality of life. You may feel alone, withdrawn and isolated, or shame, certainly stress, which we're going to get into at great length in a moment. You might feel anger and bitterness, fatigue and tired and hopelessness. So it's a range of feelings, and they may occur at different times for different people in different ways. At this point, if we can launch the first poll, we're going to hear a little bit more from you about this. Thank you. And I will read it. It's what feelings and thoughts did you experience when you were diagnosed with alopecia areata? Select all that apply. Feel free to do multiple choice here. There's anger, loss, sadness, worry, fear, shame, helplessness, denial, isolation, regret. And I'll give folks a moment or two to complete this. And Dominique, when you think most people have had an opportunity to complete it, if you could show us the results, that would be great.
I'll show them now.
Thank you. Okay, so obviously this is informal, but we see that there are lots of feelings out there. And I would say sadness at 83% is the predominant or most common emotion that you're feeling as you've been diagnosed with alopecia areata. There's also worry and helplessness, a sense of isolation and loss. There's anger, which is right up there with isolation. And there's a sense of shame or feeling of shame and denial and regret. And so I appreciate everyone's participation and sharing that it really is a continuum, right? An array of different feelings. And it's tough to go through and have so many different kinds of negative feelings and thoughts related to a chronic health concern. If there are some things that were not included, some feelings, feel free to throw them into the Q&A, because then later we can address that. All right, what I want to point out after describing all of those feelings is that this can be really difficult, right? This is not all about how do I move through it and cope, but some of it is compassion and recognition that it is quite difficult and that you're searching for people who can provide you with empathy, as well as nurturing your own compassion about doing the best you can with the information you have at the moment. So it's a chronic health condition, and we do know quite a bit about what that means for humans. Right? We know and understand that depression, sadness, and anxiety are more prominent or typical to occur in people with chronic medical conditions. So there's a bit of a higher risk of developing depression or some anxiety, which usually I consider to be first cousins. It's not unusual for those to go hand in glove. So it's a bit of a higher risk of developing that compared with people who don't have a serious chronic health issue. Information is helpful because we also know that the biopsychosocial model supports individuals with stress-mediated health concerns. So it's not a simple situation. There are biological issues at hand. There's genetic component. There's how to manage symptoms, how to better tolerate procedures and interventions that might be pharmacological and biological. So there's the body. There's also the social world, right? There's your family, there's communication with family, there's school systems, employment, professionals, your colleagues. There's your belief system as well, how you come to understand this in the culture. And there's group support or lack of group support in your social world. So there's the biological, there's the social, and now we're going to talk quite a bit about the psychological. So the psychological components really are cognitive, and that means our thoughts, what we think about this. And remember, a moment or two ago, we were looking at what are some of the thoughts that occur when one is diagnosed or experiencing alopecia areata. There's the affective or the emotional world. What are those feelings? And we saw the many, many feelings that can be associated with this. What are the behaviors? So that's something we haven't really described too much, but behaviors can be both what you do and what you don't do in relation to having alopecia areata. So behaviors can be avoidance of situations, not showing up at places, not going to events, not feeling comfortable to stay at something. Behaviors may be, do I wear a cap or a hat to this? Do I try a wig? Do I shave my head and not talk about it, but just present myself that way? How do I appear with it? And then there's the sensory world, which may be, what does the internal sensation feel like? Are there times when you actually are feeling and noticing the alopecia in a way that is body-based and sensory-based? So I bring that all together because these are all moving parts of a model that help to explain some of the challenges and obstacles, but also it informs us so that we can start to talk about ways to cope. A big question is the question of, is there a connection between the immune system, stress, and one's emotions? And it's a huge topic beyond the scope of this webinar, but I want to point out a couple of things. Researchers have found that there are connections between how we feel, what our emotions are, and how our immune system functions. That is pretty accepted now and standard to understand that. And while emotions don't cause alopecia, there are links between our emotions, our thoughts, and our immune system, which makes me think that we really need to get this studied and investigated more. What is the directionality of all of this? How do stress and emotions either magnify or mitigate what is going on? And as a psychologist, I just want to underscore that a guiding principle is that when stress magnifies a problem, then managing stress helps how we cope with the problem. I'm not suggesting it necessarily helps to reduce the symptoms of the autoimmune disease, but managing stress helps how we cope with those symptoms. So to summarize, stress and inflammation are related. And from the psychologist's point of view or a mental health practitioner's point of view, decreasing stress is very, very important. So what do I mean by stress? A fundamental way to think of stress, because we all have stress in our life, right? Sitting in traffic can be stressful, getting your kid to school on time, meeting deadlines at work, going to the grocery store, getting your laundry done, right? Those are our stressors that we deal with. But when an internal or an external challenge is greater than our own internal resources or our external resources, that is the definition of stress. So we're looking for a balance. We come to all of these events in our daily life with internal and external resources. But when those resources don't meet the needs of the challenges, we feel stress. So in talking about reducing stress, I'm really talking about decreasing the challenges, decreasing the internal challenges and decreasing the external challenges. And then I'm also referring to increasing our resources, both the internal resources that we have and the external resources, those around us. And we're going to talk, what does this look like? What do I mean by challenges and resources, both internal and external? So I bring up all of this because, the long-term effects of stress on health are more and more widely known. Stress on health, the impact is on multiple body systems, right? A person may get headaches if they have chronic stress. There might be heart problems that develop, stomach, GI problems, eventually diabetes and glucose imbalance because of the high level of cortisol and the stress hormones that are produced when we're in a chronic state of stress. Our blood pressure, blood vessels are stressed by this challenge when the resources aren't equal to the challenge. And our nervous system, which we hear about quite often, that fight or flight or freeze. I want to add that, it's not here in the diagram. Living in the fight, flight, or freeze mode puts stress on all of these operations that go on within us. So another really good reason to manage stress and learn some stress management skills. Wear and tear, right? Stress looks like this. It's when the external environment has just really caused this house to take a beating. And so sometimes stress feels that way, right? There's just a lot going on in your world, a lot around you, and you really feel the wear and tear. What do we do when that happens? Well, we have a variety of solutions to that kind of problem. One is to rebuild, right? With fresh materials, new design, let's get out there and rebuild. So that's kind of one approach, is to build up some of the internal resources that you have as you face the stress of alopecia areata. Rebuild. Another way to handle the wear and tear, the external stress of this, is to seek ways to reduce all of that load around you, right? So this photograph or diagram illustrates how to boost up the foundation, right? How to add some things to make it more stable. And we can think of that in our own lives as well, in both our body, which would be the internal stability that we're looking for, but also how to reduce the external load, which might mean partnering with someone, getting help, asking for help, learning more information. And we're going to walk through what some of those strategies are. But the point is that we're attacking it and approaching it from many areas. That's that biopsychosocial model. Another approach is to, again, you boost the existing structure. So adding layers. It might be asking grandma to help out sometimes so that you get a respite from time with your child. It might be joining a support group, learning more about the disease, becoming an advocate, right? Getting involved in NAF, all ways to boost the existing structure. Reducing stress, decreasing that external challenge, right? Some of this can be done as we think our way through the experience. So thinking about how to reduce those external challenges, one thing that I think is very helpful is prediction. Being able to predict and understand that certain developmental time periods might be more difficult if you're talking about your child with alopecia areata, right? Going to a new school, going to summer camp, being old enough to go on overnights or sleepovers. Things that are new experiences developmentally are kind of pressure points, a little bit of added stress for the family. So predict it, accept it, use some self-compassion. That can be quite helpful. I also think that checklists and routines are very effective at taking off some of that cognitive load, right? So if it's summer and your child is going to camp, or you're outside a great deal, always having your variety of hats nearby at the door is a routine instead of needing to go search for it each and every day. Knowing that your prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain that makes decisions and makes plans, just doesn't do as good of a job doing that when you're under a lot of stress with a flood of negative emotions. And so that's where these stress management skills that we're going to talk about, and in a couple of moments practice here, are so important. So it's not simply for relaxation, which is vital and lovely, but it helps you become a better problem solver. And by doing that, you're helping to reduce or decrease the external challenges. I think that making things easier on yourself can be really helpful. And by that, I mean follow in other people's path. So there are lots of digital and face-to-face support groups that might be useful for general stress and or for very specific issues related to alopecia areata. And the last one is kind of hard to talk about and to write down, but I think it's pretty valid. And unfortunately, sometimes people just don't get it. They aren't compassionate and empathic. And so knowing that about certain people or certain situations may indicate that it's time to limit your contact with the person or the exposure to that situation, or take it with a grain of salt. But knowing it and naming it helps to tame it a bit. And it's a kind of discouraging recognition, but it is truly something that also helps manage stress. The other tack we're taking is increasing your external resources. And so leaning on others, like the mentors and the online communities that are available, is quite helpful. Becoming an ambassador for alopecia areata, which is really interesting because when you teach others about it, you are managing it in a new way and advocating. Thank you for a couple of hearts there to indicate maybe that that's been helpful or that resonates with you. And you and your child can become advocates and feel a sense of mastery and better self-efficacy. And of course, sharing decision-making with a partner and what you're thinking about with a partner. Your partners are not mind readers. And I haven't met any partners who can perfectly read one's mind. So it's about sharing, about talking about it. And that helps to diffuse some of the external pressure on it. So boosting your internal resources, right? What do you bring to this that's going to be helpful, and how do you grow those capacities? Well, I think most of this is something that you're familiar with, but it bears repeating. Good sleep. Sleep is fundamental. None of us do anything very well if we're not getting good sleep. So sleep hygiene is quite important, and that can range from things like knowing when to turn your screens off, right? Stop doom scrolling. It could mean going to bed a little bit earlier or waking up a little bit earlier, being aware of the daylight cycle, but good sleep is quite important. Eating well, your nutrition, right? What fuels you is so important. Not doing tons of comfort eating, but eating nice, balanced, well-rounded nutritional meals. The next is exercising. And I have exercise, it should say movement really, because it doesn't have to be formal exercise. It's movement. It's walking around, walking your dog, dancing to a radio while you're doing the dishes. It's parking a little bit further away from the building so that you have more steps to take. It's going out somewhere and dancing. It's playing pickleball, whatever it is, it's important. It's a known stress relief strategy. Staying connected to friends and family. So we've talked about it sometimes being a challenge, but the flip side of that is that we as human beings are built with social brains. And so engaging in social relationships is just, it nourishes us. It is so vital. So figure out who are the important folks to stay in connection with and how to do that. Engage in a hobby. I mean, it sounds like, well, who has time for that? But it is also really well known that distracting yourself, getting absorbed in something beyond this is very, very much a way to grow those internal resources. Volunteering and helping others, I think that's very similar to the idea of engaging in a hobby, but doing for others can be so meaningful and important. Learning something new and becoming absorbed in it, right? Learning, reading books, learning a new language, learning how to play checkers, learning a new route to get to your office, whatever it is exercising part of your brain. That's quite important. And then these self-care practices that I love to talk about, and we're going to do some of them here, could be paced breathing or mindfulness or guided imagery or learning self-hypnosis. But they are self-care practices that not only help you in the moment, but they layer into your life. They become preventative tools. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's not take a deep breath when you're upset. If anyone tells you that, you probably get really annoyed and irritated. And I completely understand that. Take a deep breath as shorthand for some diaphragmatic breathing is a skill set to learn to reset your nervous system, not to use it when you're already quite elevated. So boosting your external resources, again, it's, who's around you, who are the good people for you, who nurtures you, who gives you that compassion and empathy. And sometimes it also means visiting a mental health professional. If emotional problems are arising and interfering with your daily typical optimal functioning because of stress, you might find it very valuable and useful to get a little bit of support and clarification and consultation from a mental health professional. All right, here we are. Some 7 tips to help get that tension or anxiety under control. Again, we've talked about it. I'm just going to throw this out here so that it's all on one slide for when you're reviewing and going over these slides. Get enough sleep, find support, learn to relax and practice relaxing, get some exercise or movement, talk about it. And again, that phrase, name it to tame it. Do something that you enjoy that provides you with distraction, and ask for help, which is connecting with others, even if it makes you feel vulnerable. All right, so relaxation, that boost of the internal resources that you have, that boost that you want to grow. Here are some things that a list could be: guided imagery, could be mindfulness-based experiences, self-hypnosis, yoga, music, and nature. Being out in nature is really helpful. Research is growing every day that shows that nature has some healing properties. So do that, please. Here we are, though, with the portion of our time together where it's really going to be a practice, an experiential practice. So right now, I invite you to get a little bit more comfortable in your seat. And if you're able to, put both feet on the floor so that you can feel the floor or the ground or the earth beneath you. And in a moment, as you listen to the sound of my voice, I invite you to just take a breath in through your nose and then exhale out through your mouth. No need to change anything yet. Just notice the breath in and the breath out. And some people can follow the path of the breath. And as you do that, imagine it's like a stone dropping deep into the well of your body with ripples of wellness that flow out from that stone. And should your mind start to wander away from that cycle of breath in and breath out, that's fine. We all experience that. So that in a moment, you just gently return your attention to the next breath in, the cool air at the tip of your nose, the warmth of it going through your body, and the exhale out. That's right. And as you do that and continue noticing the breath, I invite you to imagine a scene or a picture in your imagination, in your mind's eye. It might be something like floating on a cloud, drifting safely and gently. Or for some people, it might be resting on a thick beach towel, on a lounge chair, with the golden sun shining down and a soft breeze brushing up against you. For others, it might be fun to imagine drifting on a magic carpet, safely over the treetops, just high enough so that you can look around and see perhaps a meadow below of beautiful flowers. I don't know exactly what you'll notice in your imagination, but as you do notice a picture forming, I wonder what you see there while you are here in this experience. I wonder what you hear there. What are the sounds, perhaps voices or conversation, or the wind or the waves, or music off in the distance. And I wonder what you are able to smell. What odors and aromas or scents do you notice? The flowers, the nature, the ocean saltiness, or something else entirely? And what can you feel against your skin? The breeze, the warmth of the golden sunshine, a soft texture like the towel or a hammock or sand or some lovely fabric. And what can you taste? Perhaps if you open your mouth and your tongue tastes the air, is it salty? Or some other sensation? Allow yourself to experience this scene even more clearly and vividly so you enjoy it fully. And as you enjoy it, know that you've created something with colors and shapes and objects and perhaps people around. Something for you to enjoy that you created in your own mind. And it develops and it grows and it nurtures in ways that are just right for you. And know that long after this experience here concludes, the benefits of having given yourself these few moments of creating a relaxing or beautiful experience, of finding time to breathe, of finding time to notice the cycle of your own breath, the benefits of that last long after this portion of your day concludes. And so you'll be able to perhaps to again drift off or relax in ways, or sink into a space somewhere in your own home and world that feels helpful again, by noticing the breath, by following the cycle of the breath and allowing your mind to create a beautiful picture again. And the more you practice this kind of experience of mindfully managing your stress, the easier it becomes, and the more value and benefit you'll notice in the coming hours and days and weeks. So now give yourself a little bit of a hug or a pat on the back for having done this, for having listened and experienced what you've experienced. And find yourself getting reoriented to the light around you. If your eyes closed, which may happen and it's completely natural, let your eyes open and get adjusted to the light in your room again. Great. So to summarize, the keys to managing stress are really about lowering the challenges and raising the resources. And oh gosh, I'm seeing the hearts raise up, and that's like raising my resource of saying, yes, you folks have been wonderful to participate tonight. So some tips again, right? Sleep, finding support, learning to relax. And it wasn't simply sort of, I'm just going to be a loose noodle. There's a purpose to relaxation. Getting some exercise and movement, talking about what you're going through and what you need, doing something that you enjoy, and asking for help. We are about to launch the second poll, and so I appreciate Dominique's assistance doing that. And I'll read it. It's our stress management poll. In the future, will your stress management plan include, and then there's some choices, please select all that apply. Will it include boosting your internal resources, for example, through movement, sleep, and relaxation response? Will it include reducing your internal challenges? Reducing your internal challenges, excuse me, by eating healthier foods, right? So that metabolically you have more energy. Would it involve boosting your external resources, what's around you, like talking with friends and joining a support group? Or perhaps reducing the external challenges, like limiting time with negative people? And I think maybe it got excluded. I think there was one that said all of the above, right? So I'll give you all a moment to reflect. What seems like what seems like a more natural beginning for you in terms of what kind of stress management you're going to be including in the coming hours, days, and weeks?
Would you like me to give it about 10 more seconds?
Whenever you get the impression that most people have had a chance to finish, that would be great.
Okay, I'll end it. Hold on.
Okay. All right. So thank you for posting the results. So the 92% are thinking about boosting your internal resources, right? So through movement, sleep, relaxation, loads of other things. But isn't that interesting? You are looking to see how you can be stronger internally, more self-efficacious, more of a sense of mastery. Probably also the noticing that you'll have a sense of feeling safer and calmer and more stable when your internal reasons are what you want them to be. Reducing those internal challenges through something like not eating junk food, but instead eating healthy food. That's another direction. That's wonderful. Turning to the external world and resources, over half, so 65% can imagine that that might be something that they begin to put into their stress management plan. And 71% are imagining and thinking that reducing the external challenges, like limiting time with negative people or learning more information and being with people who are like-minded, I'm assuming, could also help become part of their stress management plan. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about that in just a moment or two in terms of how to get going. I'm just closing those. Thank you. So we did the poll, and I want to conclude with something that is a little bit sweet. As we talk about growing skills, you are stronger than you seem. You're braver than you believe and smarter than you think you are. And that's from Christopher Robin, who's the boy in Winnie the Pooh, the author being A.A. Milne. And I love concluding with that because that is the situation. It feels so empowering to remind yourself about being stronger, braver, and smarter. And so it goes back to that compassion and empathy. And I really encourage you all to pause every now and then and recognize these qualities. So thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. And Lisa, I see you're coming back in. And should I close my share or leave it
Sure,
up?
you can close your share so we
Okay.
can see you a little better, but I do love that stronger, braver.
Okay, great.
I think great way to conclude an amazing presentation. That was really great for everybody to hear. Well, I can only speak for myself, but
Well, thank you.
thank you so much. It's very
you.
valuable. I'd like to encourage everybody. Well, I love also seeing the reactions, so you can. Hey, the people who are here with us today agree.
Thank you.
Encourage the gang out there to post questions to the Q&A. We will try to get to as many as we can. And just a reminder that we're having a general conversation about mental health here, and Dr. Lombard can't give out individual clinical advice. I'll just start by, some folks did enter their emotions when you asked about, what were their emotions when they first were diagnosed, and someone wrote blame and anxiety. Another wrote feelings of hesitancy and inauthenticity.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm glad to see it enlarged. I think that it's absolutely valuable to hear that everybody, there's some things in common and there are individual differences and some things that come and go. And again, without going into a person's particulars, blame is not uncommon, self-blame as well as perhaps blaming some situation that a person was involved in, because we don't entirely understand, why does it start, when it starts, and how it comes and goes. It's cyclical, right? Often. And that injects a fair amount of uncertainty in how to deal with this. And uncertainty is one of the hallmarks of feeling anxious. People feel anxious when they're uncertain about something. And so, you have a wedding to go to in 3-6 months or whatever, and you're uncertain what conditions things are going to be for you. That adds so much uncertainty, or traveling, or a big presentation, or dating. I see that there's, questions about that. And so generally dealing with uncertainty is like, sunshine and water in a garden. Uncertainty adds anxiety. So it means figuring out some areas that you can be more certain. Of course, we're never entirely certain. Life, by definition, as we know it, it comes at us and we can't predict everything. So you build up your capacity to kind of tolerate uncertainty by reminding yourself that you've done it before, right? You've entered into new situations before and you've figured out how to do it. Or you've, even if you're, I like using this kind of example. If you think back to being in junior high and you're going up the staircase and you trip, right? And like you feel like everybody has just seen you trip and stared at you. And now your good reputation is known as the tripper. Well, that's actually not true, right? All those other kids are thinking about themselves at the very time that you're thinking about yourself. And so it's important to kind of remind yourself like, oh, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go up the stairs perfectly all the time, but even if I stumble a little bit, it's going to be okay.
That's great to be reminded of that. You did mention that there is a question about dating and specifically confidence to date again.
Yeah, right. And it's a hard phase and a hard thing to do. Dating was not online, people didn't set it up back in my day, but I think I know a little bit about it, but I don't want to present myself as a super expert on it. But, it's done through either, if we're talking about online meeting people, there's a visual there, right? It's how do I handle that? How much information do I share? Internet and social media is full of oversharing. And this can be a personal, private decision on your part. Some people are really much more comfortable and other people are not about sharing details to people that they don't know or who they're just meeting. I think it's really a personal, individual situation. But based on your own personal history of when and how you share information with someone you're beginning to date or just starting to get to know, either in person or through social media online. I think it is also part of your criteria, right, for getting to know someone and feeling comfortable is this person going to be the kind of person who can accept me as I am? And that takes some introspection and insight to really sit with that question and struggle. Who are the people who can accept me as I am, or can I help them accept me, right? Because people may be unfamiliar, and through no fault of their own, they need the information that you can provide them. It's not contagious, right? It's cyclical. That kind of information, many people don't know that yet.
An opportunity to be an ambassador in some ways.
Right.
Okay, another question. This person wrote, what about the emotional situation which may have been concurrent with the loss of the hair or feels like a trigger? And the fact that not having hair reminds you of that situation.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And that is, we call that association, right? So that the situation is now associated with the loss of hair or the beginning of the disease process and the symptoms coming along. So the goal would be to separate those two things, right? So not every time that happens does it mean that a person either has a flare or that they're going to get sicker or that something is going to happen. But that's a really tough process. And I would say that might require a little bit more external support. It might require a little bit of either formally seeking some support with a mental health professional, but what also comes to mind is some really lovely strategies like journaling, right? Like writing down about what happened then or drawing a picture of it. You don't have to be a great artist, but what you're doing is you're putting it outside of yourself. It's not so much of a presence on top of mind, but rather you can say, I can think about it a little bit. And probably when you do externalize it, when you look at it like that, you can see that maybe your thoughts aren't entirely accurate, that it wasn't always every time I, went and visited my family in Florida, this happens, right? There are exceptions to the rule. The other thing I like to point out is when we use phrases that are global, like always and never and no one and everyone, those are usually cognitive distortions, we call them, because it's not possible for it to be accurate each and every time around the whole universe, right? It's not every time this happens. There are exceptions. So you want to start looking for those exceptions would be a place to begin as well.
Okay, thank you. This person wrote, although I have not been diagnosed with alopecia, when my son was diagnosed with it, I experienced anger, helplessness, sadness, denial, and profound feeling of guilt as I blamed myself and sought for possible explanations such as no breastfeeding, etc.
Yeah, that is, I appreciate you sharing that and describing the complexity of what you felt when your own child was diagnosed. And I think that is something that many parents of children who have a variety of health, or be it physical or mental health concerns, feel those feelings of some guilt or blame and the questioning and the frustration and anger. So I think knowing that that's natural or normal and normalizing it can be really important. Your child is still the same child as, point before the diagnosis, right? It's not as if you don't have the same child, but there's complexity now, and there are some obstacles that make it harder. Having said that, kids who go through some challenges like this can really develop such great sensitivity and empathy that as parents, you notice that they may be bringing qualities to their own lives that other kids just don't have. I think it's a little bit bittersweet because, of course, you wish that they didn't have to struggle in any way. That's a parent's wish and dream. But given the situation, if they can come through it having developed, this more sophisticated sense of empathy for others or social justice, like that's huge. And so when you can kind of walk with them on that journey, that's also good for you to know that you are parenting that child in a way that evolves.
Thank you. Here's another question. I have been diagnosed with PTSD because of the emotional, verbal, and physical abuse I experienced in school when I developed alopecia at the age of 10 in 1968.
Mhm.
Does one ever get over that?
Mhm. I think it's a yes, you do. One does get over it in the sense of anytime there's PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And anytime there is something, an event or an experience that rose to that significance, and then there might be problems that are things like we call them intrusive memories or thoughts about the events. So if someone was abused verbally and physically and emotionally, the way this description is, that might come back at unexpected moments, or you watch a movie or read a book and something reminds you, or it could be the time of year or the driving past a location. Like there are all sorts of reasons that things will remind a person, and then the emotions come along with that memory. So one of the goals is, and again, usually it takes some support from others, either in a group or individually, but it could be done so that you might know the details of what happened, but not have that high level of negative feeling associated with those details. You are not going to undo the fact that on whatever date, in 1968, such and such happened, but you don't have to always go back into your filing system and remember that with such vivid detail. And so you learn ways to not remember it with such detail. And when you do remember it, to separate the emotion out a little bit and notice that you've dealt with and managed and become much more capable than, going back to that quote, right? You're smarter, you're braver than you thought you were. And that's really true, that the 10-year-old struggled, but now you are in a better place. I'm hopeful.
Great, thank you. Is it okay with you if we go over a few minutes just so we can cover?
Yes.
A few more questions. Okay. Just a reaction, dealing with other people's reactions can be challenging. For instance, you look so beautiful bald, or walking into a restaurant and it feels like all eyes are on my bald head. Is that more of a comment?
Those are good comments. Those are certainly, you're describing your experience, your lived experience. And for some people, it may not be the same, but for you and for others, it can be really tough. And I think predicting in advance, like how am I going to, and then working with yourself, right? How am I going to essentially desensitize, right? Not be so focused on those kinds of comments, because at the end of the day, the only person that you can control is yourself. And so there may be heads that turn, or people who think they're being appropriate and are saying things which are insensitive to you. You can decide, do you say something privately to that person of, I'd really appreciate it. It's actually better for me to not hear a comment about being bald. But from other people, it might be quite lovely to get a compliment and be told that that it's quite becoming. So I think that verbalizing it and identifying it is very helpful. And as you just described it, Lisa, saying those are comments, right? And we just don't have a way to change individual comments except through education and sensitivity. And we're seeing that more and more, I think, in the world of mental health, of saying, there's less stigma. People talk about their feelings, and that there are times when people are depressed or anxious or sensitive, and it's okay to say something to someone else about that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll try to do like two more.
Okay.
Is it normal to have dreams that you have hair and wake up extremely sad and depressed?
I will take out the word normal and say it's natural, right? We all have odd dreams. I will say, on another note, we scientifically don't yet know why as human beings we dream. There are lots of theories about it. Some theories are that dreams are a way to kind of take out the extra information that we've processed during the day, or to reorganize our memories. Like and then of course there's more psychoanalytic understanding of dreams, might be wish fulfillments. So there's no clear understanding exactly why we dream. What I like to think about is, how does it make you feel? And you've already shared, the person who posed this question, they felt sad. And so I think that's what it's about, is that yes, you are processing some sadness. And it's a natural part of going through and coping with this.
Okay. I look in the mirror and don't recognize or accept the new me. Negative self-talk is frequent when I see my bald hair, missing eyelashes and eyebrows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Negative thinking, negative self-talk. I'm glad you bring that up. And that is a component of, in general, starting to feel some tendency toward depression. I don't mean to say it's a clinical depression, but those are aspects and elements of feeling depressed, is that we see only the negative rather than the positive of something. And so for you are noticing these elements and the loss and the negative reaction that you're having to it. And again, I would say seeking support from somebody else, letting people know, like, this has just been a bad day, right? Like, all I know today is that I'm noticing that I don't have eyebrows. So you're not noticing all the other things that are going on around you, or things that you've said and done that have been, spot on. But what you notice is the eyebrows today. And so I think sharing that can go quite far in helping a person feel a little better and a little cared for.
Okay. I'm going to make this the last question.
Okay.
How would you recommend navigating having alopecia in the workplace? Any tips how to be a self-advocate?
Mm-hmm.
And the person says, may forget or not feel like putting on fake eyebrows, needing to navigate weird stares you get outside of work as well. How to handle that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think it speaks to how do we expect others to be sensitive to and navigate any differences that people bring to the workplace. We come in all sizes, shapes, colors, genders, have different lifestyles, and it's part of what we're now expecting and should expect, right? To be respected and cared for, even by people who may not understand. So I think that question is, do you become the advocate, or do you work toward having the culture in your workplace be more accepting and open? And that could be for all people. So not to focus on your individual situation with alopecia, but to try to encourage a more general, really healthy acceptance of differences and diversity, I think is an important starting place for that. If there are people who really trouble you, I think that question is, do you talk individually to them, or do you go and talk to sort of your supervisor or someone else to indicate that this has become a problem? And I would refer you to, how do you handle any kind of problem with human resources and sort of chain of command in your workplace.
I think we will wrap the questions up there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this valuable information. We've got a couple of questions asking about the slides, so we will definitely provide at least some of them in the form of a PDF when we send you the link to the recording. So thank you for allowing us to do that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation to be with you all tonight, and for me to learn more about alopecia as I prepared. I really appreciated that, and I'm glad to have met and spent so much time thinking about it with you, and hopefully this has been helpful. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen again and wrap this up. And thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And as we mentioned earlier, if you or a loved one are in a mental health emergency or suicidal crisis, help is available. Call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Okay, well, thank you for being here. Thank you for participating and sharing your questions and your reactions. It's great to have such a participatory audience on these webinars. And please share your feedback on this and help us plan for future presentations. A link to a short survey will pop up in your browser window at the end of the webinar, and your feedback is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Lisa, and your team. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I got a couple more slides, but join us for our next webinar. Your questions answered, more on managing the wig and cosmetic challenges in alopecia areata, which will take place on Tuesday, May 16th. We had an overwhelming response to our March webinar. So Amy Gibson, Kathleen Leonard, and Georgia Van Kuylenberg are coming back to answer your questions. They'll share their tips on techniques for wigs, eyebrows, and eyelashes, and cover some of the topics that we ran out of time for last time. Even if you missed the first session, tune in for new information and answers to questions. And remember that all of our past webinar recordings are available at naf.org/webinars. And NAF's annual conference is coming. Join us in person in Denver, Colorado for Reaching New Summits Together, the 38th Annual National Alopecia Areata Foundation Conference. The registration for the conference is now open. The conference will include informative patient stories and empowerment sessions, presentations on alopecia areata research and treatments updates, and there is a children's camp for kids ages 5 to 17. Our featured speakers include Grammy Award winner Molly Tuttle, Dr. Brett King, Dr. Britt Craiglow, Dr. Angela Cristiano, and more. Check out the conference website and to learn more about who's coming, and we hope to see you there. Register today. And don't forget that NAF offers a number of resources and programs to the alopecia areata community, including support groups, our youth mentor program, a legislative liaison program, as well as news and webinar links and how to get involved. To learn more about NAF and the resources we offer, please visit naf.org or email us at support@naf.org. And that concludes today's webinar program. Thank you again, Dr. Lombard, for joining us, and thanks to the folks in the audience for being here. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.